There is a quiet tragedy that rarely announces itself. It does not arrive as a failure. It does not look like collapse. It does not resemble the dramatic breakdowns we are taught to fear. Instead, it looks like a life that works, a life that is approved of, respected, stable, predictable. And yet, somewhere beneath the surface, there is a growing absence, a subtle erosion of something essential, a sense that you are present in your own life, but not entirely alive in it. You wake up, fulfill expectations, meet obligations, respond correctly, say the right things, and slowly, almost invisibly, you begin to disappear. Not physically, but psychologically. Because there is a version of you that never gets to exist. Modern culture rarely questions this. In fact, it rewards it. From a young age, we are trained to interpret approval as alignment. Good grades, polite behavior, safe choices, socially acceptable ambitions. We learn to calibrate ourselves based on external feedback. What earns praise, what avoids rejection, and over time, this calibration becomes identity. We stop asking, "What is true for me?" and begin asking, "What will be accepted?" This is not seen as a problem, it is seen as maturity. A successful person is someone who adapts well, who fits, who navigates systems without friction, who becomes reliable, agreeable, consistent. But something is misunderstood here, because adaptation, when taken too far, becomes self erasure, and the cost is not immediate. It accumulates slowly. You don't notice it in your 20s, perhaps not even in your 30s, but eventually there comes a moment, a quiet, disorienting realization that you have built a life around a version of yourself that was shaped more by expectation than by truth. Carl Jung once described this as the formation of the persona. The persona is the mask we develop to meet the demands of the world. It is not inherently false. It is necessary. It allows us to function socially, to cooperate, to belong. But the danger begins when the persona becomes the whole identity, when you are no longer wearing the mask, but living inside it. Jung warned that what we reject or suppress does not disappear. It moves into what he called the shadow, the unconscious part of the psyche where disowned aspects of the self reside. And this is where the hidden cost begins. Because the more you live according to what is approved, the more you exile what is authentic. Let's understand this through a deeper psychological progression. Not as a problem to fix, but as a process to recognize. Stage 1. The construction of the acceptable self. This stage often begins early. A child learns quickly which behaviors bring warmth and which bring distance. Approval becomes a form of psychological safety. And so, adaptation begins not consciously, but instinctively. You become the good one, the responsible one, the achiever, the one who doesn't cause trouble, the one who meets expectations. Each adjustment feels small, reasonable, necessary. But over time, these adjustments accumulate into a structure, a version of self built not from inner truth, but from external reinforcement. At this stage, there is little conflict, because alignment with approval feels like progress. But something important is already happening. Parts of you that do not fit this structure begin to go quiet, not gone, just unexpressed. Stage 2. The silent accumulation of the unlived life. This is where the cost deepens. The choices you make begin to follow a pattern. Safe decisions, predictable paths, things that make sense, things that others understand, career choices, relationships, lifestyles. Everything is coherent from the outside, but internally, something begins to fragment. Because alongside the life you are living, there exists another life, a quieter one, the path not taken, the voice not expressed, the risk not chosen, the identity not explored. Friedrich Nietzsche once suggested that the greatest burden is not suffering itself, but the weight of unlived potential, and this weight does not feel dramatic. It feels like restlessness, like subtle dissatisfaction, like a persistent, undefined sense that something is missing. You may not even be able to articulate it, only that, despite everything being fine, it does not feel complete. Imagine a man sitting alone in his car late at night. The engine is off. The world is quiet. He has just returned from a long day, meetings, conversations, responsibilities fulfilled. From the outside, nothing is wrong. But he doesn't get out of the car. He just sits there. Not because he has nowhere to go, but because he feels no urgency to return to the life waiting inside. There is no crisis, no collapse, only a quiet hesitation, as if something within him is asking a question he has spent years avoiding. Stage 3: the emergence of inner conflict. At some point, the psyche begins to resist, not violently, but persistently. You may begin to feel disconnected from your own decisions. Certain roles start to feel heavy. Conversations feel rehearsed. Achievements feel strangely empty. This is not failure. This is the beginning of awareness. Viktor Frankl described this as an existential vacuum, a sense of meaninglessness that arises not from lack of activity, but from lack of alignment. You are doing things, achieving things, but they do not feel like they belong to you, and so a tension forms between who you are and who you have become. This is often misinterpreted as burnout, or dissatisfaction, or lack of motivation, but at a deeper level, it is something else. It is the psyche attempting to reclaim what has been suppressed. The shadow begins to surface, not as clarity, but as discomfort, not as answers, but as unease. Stage 4: the choice between continuation and integration. This is the most critical point, because awareness alone is not transformation. Once you begin to see the gap between your external life and your internal truth, you are faced with a difficult choice: to continue as you are, or to begin the process of integration. Integration, in Jungian terms, means acknowledging and reclaiming the parts of yourself that were excluded, the desires that felt inconvenient, the interests that seemed impractical, the truths that risked disapproval. This is not a dramatic reinvention, it is a gradual reorientation, a willingness to listen inward, even when the external world does not immediately validate it. And this is where fear emerges, because living a life that others approve of provides a kind of safety, predictability, structure, social acceptance, but stepping beyond that, even slightly, introduces uncertainty, and uncertainty feels dangerous, even when it is psychologically necessary. Now imagine a different scene. An older woman stands in an empty house. The rooms are quiet, the furniture is still, the walls hold decades of memory. She walks slowly from one room to another, not looking for anything, but remembering a life well lived by all visible standards, responsibilities fulfilled, roles performed, expectations met, and yet there is a subtle question in her eyes, not regret in the dramatic sense, but curiosity about who she might have been if she had allowed herself to become more than what was expected. This is the existential cost, not failure, but incompletion. Near the end of life, the question is rarely, did I do what was expected of me? The question becomes, did I become who I was meant to be? And these are not the same thing. To live entirely within approval is to trade authenticity for acceptance, to gain certainty at the expense of depth. But the psyche does not forget. It keeps track of what was not lived, and eventually it asks for reconciliation. Jung believed that the goal of life was not perfection but individuation, the process of becoming whole, not by rejecting society but by integrating the self that exists beyond its expectations. This is not about abandoning responsibility, it is about inhabiting your life more fully, letting your choices reflect not only what is acceptable but what is true. Because the real tragedy is not that others misunderstand you, it is that you never gave yourself the chance to understand who you actually are without their approval. There is no dramatic moment where this realization must occur, no sudden awakening required, only a quiet shift, a willingness to notice where your life feels borrowed and where it feels genuinely yours, and perhaps, slowly, deliberately, to move even slightly in the direction of what is real. If this reflection resonated with you, consider staying connected. There is more to explore in the quiet layers of the mind.